The term CPU cores will show up on the exam because CPUs are now architected or built in such a way that they may have more than one core. So let's begin with a simple discussion on what is a core. Well, a core is the part of the CPU that actually makes it a CPU, central processing unit, and this is what actually carries out the instructions. Now, early computers had CPUs with a single core. For a long time, especially through the 80s into the early 90s, if I told you I had a CPU in my computer, which obviously I did, it was a single core. All right, it was only one CPU, and that was all there was to it. And the best way to think about this is there was one little man in the box doing all the work. Well, then they got the idea of, hey, wait a minute. What if we had more than one CPU in a computer and we designed our software so that it would work with multiple computer CPUs? We could make our programs run maybe almost twice as fast, right? And so we started to see multiprocessor computers. Now, this had two little men in the box, but now early on this meant there were two physical CPUs soldered onto the motherboard. Okay, and when you open the box you would see two totally separate CPUs. Then Intel and everybody else jumped on the idea of a multi-core processor. All right, so this is more than one processor inside one single CPU housing. So if you open the case and you look in there on the motherboard, it looks like there's just one single CPU there. But inside that CPU, there may be more than one processor built in. Okay, and so let's go through the terminologies that you might see on the exam. You might see the term dual core. As a matter of fact, Intel, for quite a few years now, has marketed a lot of their processors as duo core or Core 2 Duo. And what that means is there's one processor in there, but it has two cores. All right, so one processor or one CPU housing, two cores, that's a dual core. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. A quad core. This is where there were four cores. Now, for a while, our servers had four distinct separate CPUs. They were expensive, and you had four, again, separate distinct CPUs. But now you can find these relatively cheap. One processor unit, but it has four cores. And it works and acts just like a four processor machine. Here's one you don't hear very much. You could see on the exam a hexacore, that's 6 cores, and then an octa-core, that's 8 cores. Now generally what you're going to see on the exam are dual core, well first single core, dual core, and quad core. That's what you see most out there in the real world, and a lot of products license their software based on how many processors you have in your machine. So if you have a quad core processor, then they're going to license you, they're going to charge you more for licensing because you're getting the power of 4 CPUs on that, and they want you to pay for that power. All right, now more cores always means everything runs faster, right? Well, again, no, not exactly, and here's why. Dual core CPUs are usually significantly faster than singles. Now why is that? Well, it is because, let me back up here. It's because that dual core CPUs kind of have a jump start. A lot of the operating systems are built to work with these things, and dual core CPUs will take the instructions coming in and split them out between both CPU cores and carry on those functionalities simultaneously. So generally they'll tend to run a lot faster, and in some cases twice as fast. All right, but that really is usually where most of us are going to lose the advantage of multiple cores, because software must be written specifically to support more than 2 cores. Now think about this. If I'm going to do 2 things at once, that's not too bad, right? We do that all the time. But doing 4 things at once, you're starting to get into some God-given abilities or talents here, because some people can do 4 things at once, jugglers and those sorts of people, much better than some of us. Same thing with your computer. Your software must be specifically written to support more than 2 cores, or a quad core or 4 core processor is not going to give you that much more functionality. You're not going to notice that you're just wasting your money. Okay, so watch for that question on the exam. Single core is good, dual core is faster, quad core is faster if your software was built to run on quad core. Alright, so anyway, this concept of cores, watch for it on the exam, it simply means the number of CPUs that are inside the housing, and the most predominantly ones you're going to see both in the real world and on the exam are the single core, the dual core, and the quad core.